wanted to join us accordingly. So let me kick this off by Kirsten saying, I cannot thank you enough for the leadership and the role that others have had. I don't know what happened. We lost the whole room for a second. I got you, Kirsten, but I'm not sure what happened.
Okay. Richard, hold on. We're just getting back on.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to keep on going.
So please don't. This room can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
I can, but it's just me. The whole rest of the room can't hear you.
Okay. What happened?
Don't know, but we're getting back in.
Okay. That's interesting. All right. Let's wait a moment and we'll get ourselves. Yeah, the connect for the room. There we go. Okay. There we go. So I want to commend this leadership team that's assembled in DC, that the work that you all have been doing before I had a chance to physically bump into Kirsten. And when I say physically, the woman was so heads down on her own taking care of y'all that fortunately she had coffee far enough that it didn't end up all over me. But I have greatly enjoyed my time getting to know Kirsten specifically, but also the work that all of you have been doing, and honored in some way that whatever we can help contribute in my suggestions and thinking that everything that we present today is straw man, straw person, straw woman, whatever the appropriate way is, to stimulate further discussion, that this is not intended to be, this is how we believe it should be done. Fine. This is really an dialogue to use a set of straw men type of examples and some things that are underway to see how we can collectively take this to the next level. Does that sound like also a plan? Perfect. Why don't we do this, Kirsten? I see somebody wearing burnt orange on the right-hand side of my screen. That's you, but I'm not seeing everybody. So some folks may have to lean into the camera, but why don't we do introductions of your table and then we'll get going. Does that make sense? So my friend wearing burnt orange.
Yeah, I start. Yeah. So I'm Hakan. Good morning. One of the founders and directors of Red Rose.
Jonathan, director with Red Rose.
Denise Velasquez with Encom.
Jim LaRue from Pin4.
Sarah Freeman from FIS.
Colin Guan from UCard.
Deb Criswell from Global Empowerment Mission.
Charlotte Porter from the U.S. Small Business Administration. Do I get to take credit for you and Richard meeting?
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sorry, Richard. Yes. We'll talk later. Okay.
Cedric Bill, project manager, PaaL.
Kirsten Trusco, PaaL.
Kim Hall, the K-Factor, PaaL Advisory Board member.
Bo Breskern, Esther.
Zach Walgamuth, CWS, Church World Service.
Carla Hughes, SKU Exchange or SKUX.
Mark Steven, Payments as a Lifeline, Director of Strategic Partnerships.
Marlon Trone, Operation Hope. Joseph Sommerschwalbe, Red Rose USA.
Diane McGraw Productions, ticket manager on the side.
So as we go through, I think it'll be clear to those of you who are joining us remotely, this is a brain trust of payment processors, fintech, financial technology, and others that have really come together as an alliance. Sometimes they compete with each other, sometimes they collaborate with each other, so it's the best of all worlds, but all focused on how to move resources to individuals that need it the most. And so,
Richard,
yes, ma'am.
so we have, thank you for that. We have the financial technology, blockchain folks. We also have our advisory. So SBA, Church World Services, others who help us better understand the people side and the nonprofit side and the government side of getting the money out.
Perfect. Let me do quick introductions for those who have joined us so far online, and then we'll jump into this agenda if that's okay. So, Krista, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Krista Lopez. I currently sit as the Senior Advisor for CTH, which is the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health, a subsidiary of Montrose Environmental. Formerly a state official with the state of Texas, both at the Texas General Land Office, looking at long-term disaster recovery funds, and with the Texas Division of Emergency Management. And also at University of Texas at Austin as the head of Student Emergency and Crisis. I also serve as the board chair for the Hummingly Foundation, which is a NGO in the disaster space focused on emotional and mental health support.
And if it wasn't for Krista, a lot of the resources for Hurricane Harvey would have not gotten out the door against a lot of very interesting challenges of which you all are probably aware. Inez?
Good morning. My name is Inez Pierce. Thank you,
I will
Richard.
get it right one day, I promise.
That's all right. I am Chief Executive of Pierce Global Partners. We are an emergency management and business continuity firm. And I also am president of a nonprofit, a very unusual nonprofit, disaster resistant business. And our focus for over 20 years has been on small businesses and nonprofits, providing them education around resilient planning and tools that can help them actually take action towards becoming resilient.
Would you take a minute and also describe some of your prior work at FEMA in one of the projects that you were involved in, and I think also ties here?
Sure. So I have extensive work with some of the people sitting at the table here, including the Small Business Administration and FEMA, in that I was director of the Seattle Project Impact Program. That was one of the 7 pilots that started focusing on mitigation and public-private partnership development, and expanded that by mentoring 250 plus communities across the United States on pre-disaster mitigation, partnership development, and solutions. So I'm very, very glad to be here, but I have a pretty extensive background in working with cross-sector and cross-discipline and developing solutions.
Great. Melissa? Everett?
Really glad to be here. I just happened on this yesterday. I'm Melissa Everett. I'm Executive Director of Sustainable Hudson Valley, which is a regional NGO dealing with direct climate action on the ground. Learned about this from Lakendra McNair at M&T Bank. We are, we've nurtured several local resilience hub initiatives in communities that need it most. And we're really exploring how to create a regional partnership and just structurally what that looks like. So I'm here to listen.
Great, Melissa. Thank you for joining. Amanda?
Hello, Amanda Mullen. I'm a project director of strategic initiatives at the National Academy of Public Administration, as well as the coordinator of our newer initiative, the Extreme Weather Resilience Hub. We come to this position with about 9 years at the U.S. Government Accountability Office doing natural resources and environment audits, including a review of the federal approach to disaster recovery, where we outlined, I think, 11 options for reforming FEMA and the federal approach. We identified over 30 different federal agencies that are involved in disaster recovery, actually made a matter to Congress to set up an independent commission to look at the system as a whole, and spent a year at FEMA working on their 5-year budget.
Take 1 minute, Amanda, and explain to those who don't know what NAPA is.
Of course. So the National Academy is a chartered by Congress 501c3. We've been around since the 1960s. We're similar to the National Academy of Sciences in that we provide advice and expertise to federal agencies, to Congress about improving management of federal agencies. We've broadened our mission. We are focused on good government promoting efficiency and effectiveness. Over time, we've realized that very much involves the intergovernmental system. So we have a Center for Intergovernmental Partnerships, and then the Extreme Weather Resilience Hub is even further building on the knowledge and expertise of our over 1,000 fellows that work in the federal, state, local academic space to tackle the particular issue of adaptation and how do we focus on place-based solutions to these challenges. And we're coming at it from a governance and financing perspective. So if you don't have the governance structures in place to be able to do these regional collaborative projects, if you don't have the financing structures in place to be able to establish public-private partnerships, it's going to be a hindrance to getting these adaptation projects off the ground. So we're taking all of our brain power that we've used for organizational assessments, mostly at the federal level for the last several decades, and really honing in on this particular challenge and this issue.
Great. Michael Budekin?
Good morning, everyone. I'm here by virtue of an invitation to Robin Hackey from the Center for Community Investment, and I'm a senior consultant with the center. We are currently working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on a 3-year initiative to focus on insurance, resilience, pre-mitigation, disaster resilience efforts in California, Missouri, Florida, North Carolina, and New Jersey. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Great. The Honorable Joanne Howard.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I wish I were there with you. I'm in Austin, Texas. I started a consulting company, H2O Partners, when I returned from FEMA, from being the Federal Insurance Administrator in 2001. That was before my great colleague, Dave Marstead, took over that spot later and followed through with a number of great initiatives. I'm a former insurance commissioner in Texas, a lawyer by training, and was federal insurance administrator. Since then, with H2O, we help people get ready for disasters. And I emphasize the people because at the community level, we've worked with 400 cities and helping them get hazard mitigation plans completed and approved by FEMA. And that's not about the plan. It's about the people, the locals, what they need, what they want. I was privileged to serve on the National Academy of Science Urban Flooding Study a few years back. I see Amanda shaking her head on that. We visited several U.S. cities looking at particularly the stormwater systems. Right now, we're in the midst of working with the city of Austin, Texas on an interesting project, which maybe I can mention later. But it is about the people. It's about communicating and having them understand these complicated programs, how things work, what it takes to get the next step ahead. And we're looking at innovative products to help fill gaps with insurance and other programs. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me today, and I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Great. Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing the Astros home with a victory last night. David Marstead is going to speak with us in a little bit, but David, go ahead and make the formal introduction that you can do much better than I will.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. I am principal at Marstead Advisory, LLC. Currently, from 2016 to 2024, I was with FEMA in a number of roles, from the Federal Assistant Administrator of the Federal Insurance Program to Deputy Associate Administrator of the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, and then also Deputy Associate Administrator for Resilience, which had a broader portfolio than just federal insurance and mitigation, went into preparedness and other parts of the resilience space at FEMA. I was with FEMA also the first time from 2001, as Joanne mentioned, to 2008. My first role during that period was as regional administrator out in Region 8 in the 6 states that Region 8 serves. Went back to headquarters in 2004, again, essentially as the senior executive of the National Flood Insurance Program, overseeing the insurance mitigation portfolios, building science, dam safety, earthquake hazard reduction program. And obviously during that period of time, as we are now looking back 20 years, I oversaw the flood program during Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. Prior to that, I had a insurance agency, independent insurance agency, 20 plus years working with people and figuring out how best to protect their homes and auto and small business, et cetera. Also served as mayor of my hometown, state senator in Nebraska, and lieutenant governor of Nebraska. So I say all of that only to illustrate that I've looked at, witnessed, and been a part of this situation at virtually every connection point. And that experience has been one that's been very helpful in the variety of roles that I've been privileged to serve in. So glad to join you this morning, and hope I can bring a little something to this conversation.
David, thank you for being here. Kirsten, I want to emphasize that David started his career when he was 14. All right. And still going strong. Again, certain folks will join us through the morning, and we'll just make sure folks are appropriately introduced as we go along. Let me make sure that, can you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a pretty full agenda, and I'm going to try to keep moving this along. Some of this, I believe, that will stimulate a lot of conversation and discussion, and that there'll probably be just as much ideas and suggestions when you leave the room. So the opportunity to get your feedback post this is the door for, obviously for Kirsten and the team to capture, not just yesterday, but today. It is, greatly welcome. This is, again, a dialogue. I want to start off, as we move down this pretty full agenda, by providing a couple of things that I shared with some of y'all before, but enhanced a little bit. And I'm going to obviously share this PowerPoint back out for y'all to spend more time at. But I think we all could agree that we're in a very transformational period in this country, not just about what the future of FEMA or the federal agencies are, but really around what and how the nation, and that means public, private, philanthropic, address risk from these persistent billion-dollar, and doesn't even have to be $1 billion, but the realities that we are having persistent disasters, and that there really has been a number of organizations, institutions, individuals, all focusing on what it is that we can be doing regarding risk for individuals, families, neighborhoods, communities, businesses. Unfortunately, we think it's a Gordian knot, which cannot be easily untied. You have to understand what are all the different threads that are in this Gordian knot, but we do believe that there is a time that is on, in front of us right now to really put a sword to that Gordian knot and design something going forward. It doesn't mean that what's been done in the past is completely not appropriate, but I think we have this moment to really create something that may be more efficient, more effective, and frankly, more economical. Here's the challenges that we, Future Proofing America, ROAR partners in our leadership have, truly spent the past 3.5, 5 years, however you want to describe it, defining. You can read these faster, and I'll put some data points up to this. But we kind of call this the big six that are challenges and hurdles. It's why yesterday, Joanne, I reintroduced myself to this group as the Vin Diesel of doom. And so the reality is we've got a lot of challenges that this group and others have been working on and seek to transform. But it also means that there are a lot of resources and a lot of smart brain power to begin to take a look at how we resolve and come up with a new approach or a new framework. You can again read this faster, but there isn't any chart that we have produced from our research that is going in the right direction. Lost claims, cost of, rebuilding, what it means alone just to the public infrastructure, not even the private infrastructure. These numbers are not good. And it means that all of these prior presidential declarations on top of additional mean that we actually have to come up with something that is more financial, economic, fiscal with an F, and societal connected. When we started taking a look at some of the other corollary issues, which David and others can talk about as well, is the rising gap in insurance or the protection gap, mortgages defaulting, asset devaluation. The reason why I constantly raise this is that there are so many impacts on individuals and families and communities, but there are also a lot of stakeholders that we think sometimes are not at the table until post-event. And that is not as efficient as we could have folks ahead of the curve working together on some of these issues. And when you start looking at the mounting economic consequences, I think that is also a driver for people seeking some new answers and some new solutions. We've talked with real estate developers. I was on the phone yesterday with Sid Kiston, who two-time NFL football player, buys 50,000 plus acres and built out Babcock Ranch on part of that. Some of you may or may not have heard of Babcock Ranch or remember it, but it is the development in Southwest Florida that survived the direct hit of Category 3 hurricanes. And so you now have the real estate world, whether it's master plan communities all the way over to affordable housing, trying to determine what it is that they can do to lean into this. And then you've got elected and appointed officials that are frankly overwhelmed from having to constantly go back to their taxpayers and citizens to put money forward and constantly rebuild. Ellicott City, Maryland is to me one of the great examples, that's been rebuilt now 3 times. And that's not easy to keep on going back to taxpayers at the state or local level without coming forward with a different approach. This is pretty obvious, and I highlighted the yellow for a reason, and it's not a political reason. It is when we looked at this data, it was December, early January. This is completely not relevant for the moment. And it's not a negative. In some regards, it's an opportunity for us to take a look at what does this mean for a federal devolution or changes and tweaks, but also what states, counties, municipalities and even special districts that are out there are going to do for funding. This was the slide yesterday, Kirsten, that I wanted to pinpoint a little bit. I think Axios did a fantastic job. You can look at that map and immediately understand where the greatest challenges are going to be for replacing whatever is the federal devolution or whatever is the transformation that is required. It's no surprise at all where these are, aligning to also low to moderate income communities that are within these areas of the country that are persistently hit. So how we look at replacing, augmenting, aspects of the funding mechanisms is critical. Now, we keep on talking about a capital stack, and let me explain very quickly. A capital stack in our minds is how do you actually bring public, private, and philanthropic resources in funding allocation together in a new form of replacing, augmenting what's been in place before. So if you take a look at that left-hand side of what the public structures have been, David, you and Joanne and others can remark about this as we go along this morning. But the fact is that map, so to speak, of resources is completely in transformation now. And that means that transformation then comes down into states, counties, municipalities, and others who are the beneficiaries of these resources. What we're saying on the right-hand side is there are abundant amount of resources funding in this capital stack. We just need to have new mechanisms to unlock it. And that was a part of the great conversation that you all had yesterday, is that there's already some examples underway. We just need to figure out how to create the structures and scale these more rapidly by leveraging the pilots or demonstrations that some of you are already working on in ways that can become maybe more permanent solutions. That means when we say that there is a lot of capital, we've started looking at what we believe is about $2.3, $2.5 trillion of capital, some of which has been sitting on the sidelines. Some of it is, yes, directed towards post-event recovery. What we're emphasizing is the amount of capital that is available for pre-disaster preparedness and risk mitigation. And I'm encouraging all of us to think about that aspect as much as the post-event recovery and rebuild. We also have brought in Howard W. Buffett Jr., Howard Buffett's grandson out of Columbia, as a strategic partner to look at what we call the impact rate of return. And when Operation Hope goes into a community with its resources, what we're saying is that sometimes the secondary and tertiary impacts are often, I hate to say this, considered to be cute or ancillary. That's no longer the case. So if I can fix the sticks and bricks, for instance, of a home, which you'll hear about today, I'm actually having an important beneficial impact on the health and well-being of the occupants. So sometimes we only focus on insurance as it relates to property and casualty and flood. It's the reason why some of you've heard today and others have talked about the healthcare benefits, which are a direct measurement of impact and can be used more efficiently. So we've asked Howard to work with us on truly putting a true dollar on these secondary and tertiary impacts with a true rate of return. He ran it on his grandfather's portfolio and on the Gates portfolio, so it's been tested in that way. All right. Now, I'm hoping that what emerges is PaaL is a part of driving, supporting, and integrating to what we're referring to as these alternative mechanisms. This is one that we have formed. I'm not telling you all that you need to adopt it. I'm just giving you, again, an example of what the market is beginning to emerge towards, and that is these alternative mechanisms that create both a risk impact and a societal impact on how to unleash and unlock a lot of corporate philanthropy, foundations, and donor advised funders who, by the grace of God, do show up, 0 hour after an event. We believe that there is a greater interest now to look at ways to use their grants and their other funding for doing some of this pre-disaster investment, whether it's large infrastructure down to individuals being able to obtain, battery, solar storage, generators that are there throughout the year in some of these community centers. So we believe that there are a lot of different mechanisms that need to emerge that bring together stakeholders with a more permanent form of funding, not the episodic funding that occurs as a result of an event. So I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions to what I've shared, but those were provided just to spark the conversation this morning. But I think it's more important that we hear from y'all about some of the takeaways from yesterday, what we learned, what we heard, and then we'll use what I presented, what you all share from the table there in DC, to now also have our speakers and the discussants make sure that we're weaving these together. So if there's any questions before we get going on what I've shared, jump in. Otherwise, we'll start moving down the path of our agenda.
Richard, will you give us the slides?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Those will be sent out immediately hereafter. But any immediate remarks, pushbacks, concerns, comments about what I've shared so far?
Well, I'll just add, I thought it was an interesting to see the alignment on the Axios FEMA spending map that you posted earlier, how it really overlaps the, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the National Risk Index that DHS and FEMA created that talked about, the census tracts that were perpetually at risk in vulnerable populations throughout the United States, and the spending in those sort of hot zones, the heat maps that were highlighted on Axios seems to align with many of those disaster resilient zones. So on the one hand, it's good to see that funding is being spent in those vulnerable populations. But the reason why it's being spent there is because they are vulnerable populations and they can't afford it. So it's good to see that there is some sort of focus, and seems to justify the naming of those or identification of those particular areas.
Marlon, as you know, and David and others will talk about this, what we hoped out of the Community Disaster Resilience Zone Act, referred to CEDARS, when we worked with the Reinsurance Association and others in identifying these 4,000 census tracts. Whether that program comes back or whatever the future of that FEMA and whole of government initiative, the fact is we have the data on those 4,000 census tracts now defined as most at risk, most in need. And
Absolutely.
I think that is, again, a target opportunity for us to know where we need to be pushing in rather than waiting for the next event. It recognized that this was a persistent and perpetual issue that needed a lot of time and attention, not just going from surviving, but more focused on thriving. Does that make sense, Marlon?
Oh, I agree 100%. We use it weekly and daily to determine how and where we build strategic alliances. Where we're deploying to ensure that we're deploying our services in the most appropriate areas. So, yeah, it's a very useful tool.
Why don't we, if you'll say your name again, but why don't we go around the table and from yesterday's agenda and yesterday's discussion, I'd love to see, and I know it's still fresh, but I'd love to capture what you all think, or I'll go back to my texts, what y'all think were 3 critical takeaways from what you heard and, what you learned and what you heard yesterday. And if you don't raise your hand, I'll just start calling you out by name.
Richard, do you want us to go around the table or just pipe in?
Yeah.
All right, Hakan, you're in front.
Okay. So I think so. As a bit also outsider coming to the US and trying to learn from you all guys over here, my actually 3 takeaways. Number 1, it's extremely fragmented from the rest of the world. So US is very much fragmented. There are so many entities that are actually trying to come together to solve a bigger problem, but also there is not so much interoperability or there is the will to do it, but it is not yet happening. And then there is not, let's say, coordination that is based on both technology, but also the culture of that thing. So that's not actually, but also it is like where everybody is trying to head to in the also like within all these like groups and everything. But it's also for me the key takeaway is because of that there is so much to do over here. I think there are very good examples also from the rest of the world, and it's, I would say, slightly better solved in the rest of the world than in the US at the moment. So there is a lot of potential like examples that can be looked at. But that's my bigger takeaway. So, and then there is no common infrastructure. That's also for me a bit surprising that like there is no common infrastructure because of that everything is so much fragmented and everybody had to solve their own way, kind of, because you need to respond to an emergency and then you do what it takes to do it. And then over and over you do it. But then because you don't step away and then look at while in the, let's say, blue sky, you just don't do it yet. So it's repetitive. So I think that's one of the key takeaways from yesterday. Again, like we all discussed this. And that's why we are together in the first place anyway, in this one. So, and then for me, I think another takeaway, and I'm technical background, so I'm an engineer. The technology, I think, is all there. Like we are very sophisticated in technology, and many organizations over here are tech, fintech, so it's there. Like, but the culture is not there of getting it done. And then that thing is very good, like the GSD. So I think we just need to do the GSD. So that's like how the things should work. So that's my, again, key takeaway. So how we can come really with a very pragmatic, let's say, pilot or whatever it is, right? Because we are on this table just to make it happen.
All right, perfect. Let's keep on going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what Hakan said, but yeah, I think we need to start. We need to pilot. The tech exists. The tech is there. Like all those, from an operational perspective, it's already solved. So there's a real challenge, I think, around the table to adopt it, to use it, and to create a culture that makes it acceptable and, and then demonstrate the value for money, the efficiency, the governance, the oversight of what it brings. But tech is not an issue. Like everything that was discussed yesterday, I was surprised a couple of times when people were saying maybe in 5 years we'll have X, Y, Z. It already exists. So now it's just about aggressively adopting it and rolling it out. That's my takeaway.
Gotcha. And kind of to build on that, like we do have all the technology sitting in these rooms that we're sitting in. And so collaborating together and weaving these things together to make it easier for, the nonprofits, the states to be able to access this. Cause I feel like they reach out and they're like, I need some money. Where do I go? What do I do? And then also bringing that accountability so that as everyone's going out, working on getting donations, they can look people in the eye. People know that the money that they're giving is going to a place and not kind of disappearing into the ether. Because with some of the things that have happened recently with the wildfires, I think that's at the forefront of the donors' minds. And then the other thing that kind of hit me yesterday is this concept of pre-positioning, which seems a little difficult because it seems like often maybe the money comes after the disaster. But I think to the extent that we can work together and figure out how to get out ahead of it even a little bit, to the point of you brought up sandbags a couple of times. It can make so much less money can make a much bigger impact. And so it's from looking at all the stats, we've got to figure out how to make this money stretch further as we move forward. And pre-positioning is how to do it.
And my takeaways are really consistent with those. It's the gap between our capabilities and what we can do and what is actually being done. And in particular, on the timing side, the reactive approach to these disasters and other crises after the fact versus being proactive in advance and the pre-positioning, the pilots, so that the capabilities can be turned on quickly versus weeks later. When, as Marlon had the very great statistic of if the doors are closed for 5 days of the small business, it's whatever, 90% are not going to reopen. So it's just the approach right now is broken. We have the capabilities, and it's a question of will and effort.
All right, and this is my first time in attendance, so I was really inspired yesterday by the level of empathy and desire to correct this issue that we have, and just hear some of the organizations that spoke and some of the situations that we really have to work toward. It really personally inspires me to commit not only my business side, but also my personal attributes to be able to help resolve this. And then, as many have mentioned, the pre-positioning is so critical. I fully understand that and would really like to understand better how we can, increase awareness of the technology that's in place today with some of the, restricted spending or filtered spending that we have to really ensure those dollars go much further than what they've done in the past.
And I'm going to piggyback on all three of you that talked about pre-positioning. I think that's so important, especially the pre-disaster investments. How do we educate our donors to go that route instead of seeing something on TV or seeing something at your ATM? Do you want to donate to? How can we get this pre-disaster funding secured? And I think education is going to be the key to that for our donors for funding.
I think you're going to continue to hear a theme here, but pre-positioning, first of all, I'd love to hear more about that, especially from organizations that are able to do that as an organization that is not. But I think that's an exceptional topic to explore. The innovation and potential collaboration around the room the fact that, you know, there could be a lot of potential competition in the room, but the fact that this group is willing to come together, kind of look past that and share some common ideas, common mission sets, I think is impressive. And I think also speaks to the power of the group and what the group can potentially get done. And then I would say, one thing that I noticed is from my own experience, I think there's a knowledge gap. I think there's a knowledge gap between emergency management and fintech. And I think there's an opportunity there for more education, because I think that the fact that there's so many fintech organizations that are in the disaster space is unknown to your traditional emergency managers. Your traditional emergency managers may not be familiar or comfortable with either with fintech or just with finance. So we talk about disaster money flowing, we talk about individual assistance, et cetera, but this is a different level of discussion around finance. So I would throw that out there too.
Well, just to piggyback off what everyone said, especially about the technology gap and having to fill it with education, technology, and trust, being able to build these systems transparently and make sure that the records are immutable, to make sure that the regulators, the tax, everyone has the tools that they need to be able to discuss, hey, this individual needs aid, this individual's got their aid, so the money gets to them quicker, because that saves lives. I would say, you know, the biggest impact I had was, you know, when you were talking about, you know, Katrina, how long ago it was and how things still haven't changed. And, you know, with these technological solutions, speed is why we're in the market, and being able to deliver that to disaster, that's something that, you know, as a Token X, we really want to, you know, especially work with anyone in this room, you know, with their passion that they have for the problem.
Excellent. So guys, David just came in. He wasn't here for the round robin, and he's founder and CEO of TokenX. It's a blockchain fintech. So all the records are immutable. Cedric, this was your first time at one of these.
So same thing that he said as far as Katrina, hearing you say 20 years ago, how nothing has changed. And for me, I'm new to the disaster space. MBA, so I've been in economics and business, but learning it in disaster a whole new day. The fact that nothing has changed, it made me think about state government and the importance of infrastructure. I know other calls we've had with Richard, you mentioned that as well. So that's one takeaway. Seeing stablecoin, like you said, blockchain, seeing how you could implement that within disaster. Just the innovation was interesting to me as well.
So I'll quote one of our friends and speakers, Jamali from Bid 360. And he said, and Richard, I don't know how much you've shared with our friends online about PaaL being a 501c3 as a convener to bring together the NGOs, the government, and the fintechs who can get stuff done. Data was a recurring theme. And the more that you all online can help us to evangelize, the mission for PaaL is delivering funds right person, right time, right purpose, with the data to prove it, which is huge. Collaboration, and then pre-positioning. We talked yesterday about pre-positioning funds, but it's really pre-positioning access to funds. So making sure, whether it's a state or a county or NGO, that we've already got the contracts in place, we've got the processes for moving the money, so that as soon as whatever the disaster is hits, we can push money in 30 minutes, not 3 months. And we have the capabilities, but we need help evangelizing. And that's our Vin Diesel of Doom is helping us evangelize. Both.
Sure. Like Cedric, I'm somewhat new to the space. So what I'm picking up is sort of how non-commercially this industry behaves. It's very top down in terms of decision making, and so there's as I represent a fintech, we have this unique issue where proof of concept is done on the ground and grassroots, and there's a support that needs to be established on a very micro scale, and that's where the proof is. But then in order to get to scale, you skip through all the layers and go up to the very top decision maker and ask someone to force decide which platform they're going to choose. So that's a really, I don't think that was talked about yesterday, but this is what I'm picking up from conversations with y'all. And I think that's a unique feature for that all of us on the commercial side who are selling a platform are going to have to wrestle with and come to terms with.
Richard, I appreciate your call to action. And I think your presentation this morning for me was very beneficial. And I feel like, now is the time to think about, restructuring the system and really focusing more on preparedness and mitigation and community resilience. Traditionally that has not been very sexy and has been very much underfunded for decades. I feel like the sentiment, within the philanthropic community and otherwise is starting to shift a little bit towards recognizing the immense importance of that work and kind of the return on investment there. So kind of this whole idea around pre-positioning, I think that's great. I think that's one piece of the puzzle. I think it needs to be bigger than that when we're talking about just overall community resilience. I mean, it comes down to financial education, like with, Operation Hope and, just all the different players that are needed to build that community resiliency piece. Because until we get there, it's going to be this process of repair, rebuild, rinse and repeat. Right. And unfortunately, we're stuck in this cycle in the country. And like you said, your numbers, they're not pretty numbers when you look at, the projections and where things are headed. So I think the more that we can lean into that preparedness and mitigation work, I think, we're going to be better off as a nation as a whole. And so that's an area, again, where our organization is really, really focusing a lot of efforts. But obviously, we can't do it alone. And it takes kind of, all sectors coming together to work towards that. I think, as others have said, right, the technology exists. I think the big challenge on our part is going to be the education, the socialization of that, and kind of, if you want to say convincing, kind of, all stakeholders in kind of the relevance of that technology. So some of the tools already exist, right? We just have to socialize it, evangelize it.
Yep. Paula Hughes. I went to the first National VOED conference back in May, and echo what you said there's a lack of understanding from a lot of the nonprofits about the benefits that fintech can bring to them in supporting their efforts. So the education that PaaL's doing helps in that regard. The data part of this, with SKUX being a platform that was built natively to support blockchain. Yes, we issue cards, but one of the things we didn't talk about is the ability to partner with other payments companies like FIS and Incom and TokenX, to where our platform could be used as a vehicle to report those transactions to the blockchain if they're not already there. So, I want to offer, the open door policy to have that discussion with anybody who's interested. Because, we all know that, for all these governments and different organizations to really understand where the money can go and how it can benefit others is that data aspect of it, and showing, the data of projects that we've done where we've found that historical spending is the first step in that. We're going to be promoting some of that based on some projects we've done with existing folks. So I'm just glad to be a part of this group and, helping to bring some of this stuff forward.
Thank you.
So I've had the privilege of working side by side with Kirsten, across the country, internationally, war zones. Los Angeles, for all intents and purposes, is a war zone right now. And something you said, Richard, about the money on the sidelines, the powers to be. I sat in a room of about 300 desperate people that lost their businesses, lost their homes, had no hope, but they showed up at this library event hosted by Operation Hope, looking for a light, any kind of a light, any kind of hope. And I got to listen to one of the government officials speak to this audience, to people that didn't even have $50 or $100 in some cases to get through the day, food, water, housing. And I heard a number spoken to, Richard, you talk about money on the sideline. The politics of disasters is the most frustrating part to me, because I had an official claim that she was sitting on $2.5 billion of aid. And they were trying to figure out how to get that aid out, the who, what, where, and when, which is why I love working with Kirsten and PaaL and now Operation Hope and others in the room here, Global. There have been maybe a dozen permits issued, rebuilding permits in the entire city of Los Angeles since the fires. And there are literally 15,000 homes and businesses that went down. The money on the sideline, you know, we got to get to that money on the sideline and get it active. The preparedness, the mitigation, the education, and the resilience. But the frustrating part is, and I'm going to be in Los Angeles again with Marlon and his team, and I'll probably see some of the same people that are still waiting on the money, still waiting on the hope. So that's, however we cut through the politics of disaster, to me is the key.
Mark, one of the terms we've used that's kind of gross, but y'all aren't eating at the moment, financial constipation. So the money's there and the need is there, but there's all this stuff in the middle, and it's around trust, the technology's there.
Yep.
And that's where this evangelizing and these introductions, like you've made threats to Richard, of if we can get that message out, we can deliver. But you got to have that trust, or they're not even going to take your call.
I want to come back to a couple of things as we go through these discussion areas, and then I do want to reserve an opportunity to talk with you and Marlon specifically about LA, because I do think, oddly enough, LA is becoming the, you know, the old tagline, if I can make it in New York, I can make it anywhere. If we can move the ball in LA, which is very difficult, it may be a test place for how to demonstrate pilots. But let's keep on going. Marlon, and I think there's 2 or 3 others, and then want to jump into the agenda.
Yeah. So 3 words for as takeaway for me: innovation, collaboration, and evaluation. Innovation obviously is us thinking new ideas, bringing them to the forefront, not just in the technology standpoint, but the way we do things. What I continually see is, and you bringing up this sort of rinse and repeat, the way we do disaster, think outside the box. Just because we've always done something a particular way doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. That's the way we need to do it moving forward. The collaboration piece, again, bringing in all of the different stakeholders, making sure you have the right folks at the table with the right ideas, moving in the right direction. My direction may not be your direction, but we may have some shared paths that we can take to get things done. And then the consistent evaluation of it. It is not just the ability to use the data to show the proof about concepts, but in how money is spent and where it's spent, but how we are, demonstrating a proof of our programs.
Yeah.
I often use the terminology or the sort of metaphor, drawing back on my Red Cross experience, is that to me is the way I would describe resilience is like a community with a house fire. Doesn't matter if Kirsten has done everything she needs to do to prepare her home. She's got the right house insurance. She's got smoke detectors in her house. She's got sprinkler systems, but if Marlon didn't do his, guess what? My house catches on fire, her house catches on fire. So when we think about resilience, we all play a part in that. Every industry, every organization, if we don't align, if we don't, all get on this bus, our community's gonna catch on fire.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin Smith, TokenX. I'm very new to the disaster space, so learning a lot yesterday. Again, I was struck by how nothing has changed in New Orleans since Katrina. I was also blown away by Kirsten's statistic of, 1 to 11 times the return for preparedness. And the theme of collaboration, as well as transparency and traceability for the funds that go out beforehand, during, after. So, and the need for collaboration is all the themes that really struck with me. And yeah, I'm still learning, so please bear with me.
Thank you. I think maybe everybody spoke so well. I echo the same opinions, of course. Maybe if I were to add if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a project or a pilot is 1,000,000. I think to convince or to educate is probably best done if we can put pilots in with NGOs, with government, with SBA, with whoever that might be, but we need to demonstrate. And I think that is the best education to the policymakers who are very skeptical. They don't understand the technology. We do have a technology around this table. We had it for many years, actually, right? And it's not, for the last 10 years of my life, I was working on geothermal energy. It's not a technological problem. It's completely a policy problem. Baseload energy not being recognized, renewable energy, right? It's intermittent versus baseload. It's another conversation, but I see very similar issues here where we have a technology. This is not a technological issue. It's absolutely a policy issue, education issue, acceptance, and adaptation of what we already have to be able to overcome the issues. That's maybe my quick summary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess the only thing I can add to this, because this is new for me and just trying to grasp it all. I come from a marketing background, so I listen to everything and I see that education is important, but you have to have communication. So you have to bring more of a public relations component into this so that the general public understands everything that's going on. Not too technical, but it will then equal into funding. Because if people know what's going on, then they see these NGOs or these nonprofits, they'll be more inclined to maybe donate. And so that gives you increased funding as well. So I think communication along with education equals funding. So that's all I have to.
Thank you, Trey.
I have not been here long enough to give input on this, so I'll pass it right
No,
back.
Trey, all we're doing is saying 3 things we learned from yesterday.
Oh. I learned a lot yesterday. I don't get to spend a lot of time in these kind of environments, so it's amazing to hear everything. As Eric said, the Katrina, the change from Katrina, and the non-changes from Katrina are fascinating to me. Hearing about all these great new technologies, I've heard about SKUX in the past and TokenX, but I was taking Carla took me through a demo of SKUX yesterday, and it's really, really amazing how you can how funds can actually be distributed that fast. It all sounds super gimmicky and and rightfully so, because it's magic. It is seriously magic. Some of these technologies that everyone is creating around the room and everyone. I'm calling out Carla because I got that demo firsthand, but it's really brilliant, the work, especially in the technology space. Being a young guy, it's just amazing. It still blows my mind, even though I've grown up with a phone in my hand since I was a little baby. It's amazing to see all the technology rising in this space, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
I'd like to say one last thing.
Yeah.
The thing that disappointed me was to see some of the leaders say, well, maybe in the next 5 years. Why not in the next 5 minutes? We all have that capability, but it is about the reach, the communication, the education. But when I hear government leaders talk about maybe 5 years from now, it's discouraging. It's just.
Right. All right, so I want to, because I know we've got a certain limited time. So I want to keep things moving, and I've taken significant notes, and I'm also listening, Kirsten, to kind of some common themes. Let me now kind of move into leveraging some of the additional expertise on the phone or on the screen. All I want to do by this is remind us, because I had to learn a long time ago that innovation is not technology. Innovation is really about social, societal, people engagement. It's how technology and innovation improves and enhances. That's my perspective, not be everybody's. So let me use this example. Gensler, who is one of our strategic partners, is the largest global design firm. Again, we all know what the disasters look like. We know where they're occurring. We know what the cost is. So part of what the connection point is, it's place-based. We know where the infrastructure is. People live, work, play, educate within that infrastructure. It is the reality that we must continue to look at the connection between places, the built environment, so to speak, and the social vulnerabilities. In this theme of going from surviving to thriving, meaning don't go from one event to the next event, but to really get into some of the long-standing issues that are worsened by persistent disasters. So David Marstead, I can't think of a better person to talk about not just insurance gap, but also why all of this aligns to lifelines. So David, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciated hearing the takeaways from yesterday and the passion and commitment you collectively articulated. So thank you for that. Let me start with a couple questions in the hopes of framing this discussion. What is the problem that needs to be addressed? What outcomes are we aiming for? What must change or be approached differently? It can be proposed that when future disasters strike, the goals should include reducing loss of life, minimizing property damage, decreasing disruption to family, work, and community life, as well as limiting negative impacts on economic activity and disaster-related hardship, or maybe more simply stated, what national objectives must we pursue to effectively reduce avoidable disaster suffering? Naturally, there are a lot of layers on this onion to peel back. And our discussion this morning is intended to focus on some specific measures that will contribute to less disaster suffering. But I also find it helpful while looking to find the lost puzzle piece on the floor to keep the entire picture top of mind. I believe we know what it takes to be individually and collectively resilient. We know that identifying risk, assessing impacts from risk, and determining what actions are needed to reduce or eliminate the impact increases the ability to bounce back faster and more effectively. One of those actions, risk transfer, insurance, many times enters the picture late in the discussion instead of upfront. I suggest we can do a better job of incorporating risk transfer as a valued piece of the puzzle, instead as it is sometimes characterized a necessary evil. As disaster after disaster has illustrated, insured survivors fare demonstrably better than those without that valuable financial protection. I would caution the map that showed the individual assistance across the country, that individual assistance is really misunderstood. It is intended to help people in those initial days with emergency support. And unfortunately, the amount of resources that are available that don't really provide that long-term path forward. And so the individual assistance piece needs to be better understood in the characterization of it's really the lacking of it providing meaningful long-term help. Insurance can fill that void. A second action to include for our discussion this morning, which pairs nicely with insurance, is mentioned already, is risk reduction, mitigation. Known fact, mitigation works, and the return on investment pays dividends. And that mitigation and insurance are inherently connected. Mitigation insurance structured appropriately strengthens resilience pre-disaster, and mitigation and insurance are crucial in post-disaster recovery. Despite the rising frequency of disasters, there continues to be a significant shortfall in mitigation investment, along with an ongoing gap in insurance coverage. And we could spend the rest of the day discussing, dissecting, maybe commiserating as to why this is the case, but for the sake of time, I just want to spotlight on who pays what. Resiliency comes at a cost, just as relevant as public safety, police and fire, education, parks and rec, et cetera, et cetera. And that cost has not been a priority, and many times even acknowledged. It seems the strategy, from my experience, and I hesitate to call it that, has been to look for someone else to bear that responsibility, either pre or post disaster. This has come into sharper focus with the current administration aiming for the federal government to shift more responsibility to state and local government, as suggested by the freezing of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community, or BRIC, pre-disaster grant funds. Regardless of the future of this federal grant program or the broader devolution, as a former mayor, it rings the bell that building resilience calls for the entire fabric of my community to work together. It's not just public or private sector or nonprofit, volunteer or philanthropic organizations or academia. It is the all for one and one for all sense of unity and interrelatedness. This changing paradigm also provides the opportunity for new creative solutions and investment strategies, such as those being advanced by Future Proofing America, to not simply fill the void, but serve as a catalyst for transformative achievement. Again, in my experience, I've found that local, state, territorial, and tribal leaders will look to trusted parties to bring to the table a game plan, so to speak, that has worked elsewhere, but is adaptable to their unique circumstances, not unlike what investors or other required partners seek, which makes securing and executing the contemplated pilot projects in a timely manner so essential. I'll wrap this up, as I've always found the discussion that occurs during Q&A to be very informative. So while I've not spent time on my passion, the NFIP, maybe we can talk about the importance of the program, how a multi-year reauthorization is critical to this discussion, how the current approach to solving the nation's flood problem is falling short, and the role that the private insurance sector needs to play in closing the flood insurance gap. Of course, it isn't only flood where insurance challenges exist: wildfire, earthquake, hurricane winds, hail, availability, and affordability. So there is certainly no shortage of topics to ponder. So to conclude, my last comment is off of some of the what was shared around the table. Is I wholeheartedly agree with a couple of comments that emergency management needs to embrace resilience. There needs to be a seat at the table of emergency management with response and recovery, and a greater understanding that it's no longer acceptable just to be able to have put in place the resources for, that response, to get through that response as well as possible, or the some resources in the aftermath, in the recovery, which many times, as it's been illustrated, takes far too long, and again, doesn't really provide that community with the sustainability it needs. This is what resilience provides, and we need to really raise that that understanding of the value associated with resilience and how critical it is to disaster management, and making sure that we really do have a situation where communities can take the necessary steps before, with funding help where needed, so that when that next disaster strikes, they are able to maintain a lively community, and one that can get back to its normal tempo a lot faster and a lot better than what we're doing it now.
David, real quick question. What's the percentage of folks that have NFIP, flood insurance in the United States?
Yeah, well, so roughly the number that's used a lot is about 5% of the residential properties have flood insurance, whether that's mostly with the NFIP. I think NFIP probably still about 95% market share, but including the limited private sector residential flood coverage. Inside what we call the high hazard area, the special flood hazard area, that number increases to roughly a third. So a third of the properties in the area that is 1% annual chance, which is just one event, which is a minimum federal standard, which is also very misunderstood. So there's a huge gap there, but it goes beyond that, because we now know, with graduated risk, flood risk across the community, there are many areas of communities, many homes and businesses that are beyond that special flood hazard area, that are as at risk for flooding as inside that special flood hazard area, that area that is required to be managed by the community, and that is the area that mandatory purchase requirements are put in place. People, I'm always amazed when the discussion after a flooding event is, golly sakes, 2/3 of the damaged property were outside this high hazard area. How could that be? And it could be because the event exceeded the 1% annual chance, that one event that I talked about before. And so a better understanding of flood risk is needed, and a better understanding of what FEMA's flood maps are supposed to do and don't do needs to occur. So the education and the communication that's talked about really it hits right at the heart of the issue associated with, the flood insurance gap. And we can just do much better at addressing the nation's flood problem than we are right now.
So Kirsten, the pivot that I'm going to ask of the room, and there are extremely urgent needs, like was described about in LA, but same thing is going on in Asheville and other places, North Carolina and other places. I want to focus these conversations and these discussions about not, quote unquote, the urgent, which still remains the priority, but as an example of how do we get folks, especially in low to moderate income communities, in a better position, including how do we get them insured the right ways, where resources can be applied. So any questions or thoughts on this topic of the insurance gap and I don't want to open up the debate. Trust me, David and I and others have been a part of the debate about the insurance sector. I think what I'm trying to suggest is what could we be doing going forward?
So Richard, one comment and David, thank you for sharing on that. I think it's a lot of it's policy, which we've talked about. So I lived in Houston for Harvey, and who would have thought, all this would flood, right? And then, so the government came, I was told the federal government came in and said, this is flood land. We're going to have it be for parks and grazing. And within 5 years, there was new housing going up in that exact same area. So we're just doing it over and over again. And that had policy. Richard, back to you.
Joanne, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Following up on some of David's excellent comments, we could talk a long time about different ways of transferring risk, and David alluded to some. There are parametric products, and I know many of you are familiar with that, which don't require indemnity. You don't have to go assess the loss and reimburse. It's triggered on an event, and the event can be designed to be disasters or any threshold levels. That can be very, very helpful in immediately providing things. Let's just imagine that there was a parametric program for small businesses that for business interruption. If a certain wind speed or a certain amount of rain or a certain temperature, that can be set. David and I are very familiar with reinsurance companies who design these products all the time, and we can talk a lot more about that. I do want to go back to something Inez said early on, and Inez, I believe you referred to Project Impact. That was a program I was very involved with when I was at FEMA. It got rather politicized. I think anytime a program gets attached to one administration, the next administration wants to replace it with their newest, shiniest program. Project Impact was a community resiliency movement, and it was spreading across the U.S. And Inez can tell you a lot about it, but it brought together public and private parties. The community sat down at large and said, what do we need to do to protect our way of life here, our businesses, our residences, every level of income? And I would welcome Inez giving some talk about that because it worked, and it was just discontinued with a following administration. The NGOs are so valuable in filling gaps, and Houston, Texas has an excellent network of NGOs where they actually do enrollment of people coming in for any need and assigning them to an NGO that meets their needs. And we don't want to leave it all up to the NGOs, nor do we want to leave it all up to government. David and I could expand on some of the government programs and how those triggers for help could be improved, and incentives. For instance, many of these communities we work with have hazard mitigation plans because they have to get federal disaster recovery. So there are incentives built in for some behavior, and I think that is also an area we could discuss. But I'll leave it at that right now, and later I can talk about the city of Austin, and they're just looking at for a pilot we're helping them with for low income areas that don't have insurance. and we haven't developed the strategies. We're still in early meetings, but I won't take any more of
But
this.
Joanne, I think Joanne, you're raising a good point. And Kirsten, I think some of you have talked about this. This country has innumerable plans that are either required to, move funding forward. It's not a lack of plans. Joanna, hopefully this will make sense. It's not a lack of plans, but those plans have some pretty interesting directional, what I call kind of roadmap signals that say, we know what the issues are. We know where kind of our pain points are. I think, Kirsten, to some degree, these existing hazard mitigation and other plans that are already on the table are wonderful opportunities to determine where PaaL, the underpinning of PaaL's capabilities in this group assembled around the table can also connect with work that's already been done, and that in a sense is kind of past some form of mustard, so to speak, with some of the officials. It's now, I guess, Joanne, really the issue is, how do you find the right champions who don't want the hazard mitigation plans just to check the box and move on?
David, I'm not sure that I know that there's any aggregation of the actions, as Richard said, that all these communities have identified. They've all said, yes, here are our top risks. Yes, here are actions that we could take if we had the funding. And that's, usually those plans are, once they're, I think they're reviewed enough, but I don't believe that the plans have been aggregated, that data is assembled so that we know the top 10 actions in the US. But I'll let David answer that. He was at FEMA after I was.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And there's always been a lot of discussion on the value associated with those plans. And it always boils back down to at the grassroots and where that leadership is within a particular community to take what's in that plans and some of the other plans that a community has and really move them into action. I'll riff off of Project Impact just a little bit because my community was a Project Impact community, one of the first ones in Region 7, and it started out as a pilot to see if that type of a concept would work. I think there were maybe close to 500 Project Impact communities around the country. Project Impact actually led into the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, which provided funding across the country instead of just in particular communities. So one of the lessons, I think, is that, yes, we need to develop some pilot projects, but then we need to figure out what is that next step to really socialize whatever we've learned from those pilot projects that work in those communities and socialize it around the rest of the country. Of course, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program led into the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Pre-Disaster Grant Program. And the big difference there is now with a dedicated source of funding, certain percentage of disaster costs go into that fund every year, unlike the previous program where it was through the appropriation process and funds would go up and down from one year to the next based on the appropriation project. So progress was made in moving the whole concept of the value of mitigation through these various stages. And that's what we need to really be focused on now, is what do we need to do to preserve the momentum of the last couple of decades in the mitigation space, the value associated with it, and how we can continue to improve and leverage what we've learned to even greater accomplishments in the future.
David, one of the folks that wasn't able to join us this morning that was before this group yesterday, Kevin with the American Bankers Association, and really leading the cause around state by state adoption of disaster savings accounts. We could call them resilient savings accounts. But I think what you're emphasizing, and Kirsten, I think this is one of my big takeaways, is that PaaL and the leadership that have assembled, plus others, including ourselves, recognize that it may not be as easy to do some of this transformation for the time being at the federal level, and that the opportunity to leverage the knowledge that's been generated from Project Impact, BRIC, early stages of Cedars, things that Operation Hope and others have put together. I think that there really is a phenomenal narrative that exists that says all but for the lack of now moving forward on the next form of this and doing it at a state and local level could be the capacity building that needs to happen next. Was that so brilliant that I literally shocked you all? Or did I fly too high? Tell me what y'all's thinking is, kind of what you've heard from David and Joanne so far.
Richard, one of the things, so doing things at the federal level have challenges anyway, have more challenges now.
Yep.
So from hanging out with the state and county leaders, they're apprehensive at getting the responsibility of having these funds pushed to them. But most of them really want to know, what should we be doing? We can't just wring our hands and think that the federal government isn't coming. We will have the money, but we need to have the readiness. So from a fintech, like Bo was saying, to think that everything comes top down and we have to wait. What McKechnie said yesterday is, no, we don't. You can go in at the state level, and he and I talked after a very prescribed way, which is what we did with the health savings accounts. It's a blocking and tackling, and you just got to keep at it. But it's way easier to do at the state and local than it is only at federal.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And in fact, I think alluding to one of the comments that I made, there really needs to be a whole change in thinking of the responsibility and the approach associated with what we've been talking about this morning. Because even with the BRIC program, the strategy was that we're going to apply for grant. And if we get that grant, then we're going to move forward with what we know we need to do. But what happens? It's a competitive program and they don't get the grant. And so everything just stops or stalls. And so we have to change this thinking of applying for grants and winning the lottery and then doing what we otherwise wouldn't do, to building it into the responsibility at the local level for what we're talking about to be acted upon, to be a priority, to get into a space of public dialogue that doesn't occur now. And that's the movement that I talked about as far as rallying around. We need to do this to reduce disaster suffering. That next disaster very well is going to strike our community. Are we going to be satisfied with what occurs at that point and after, or do we need to take the steps today that are a part of the responsibility of communities to be ready and use all the tools that are out there? You all are absolutely right. It's there. What do we have to do to drive that initiative and to assume what needs to be done in the best interests of that community long term to be viable and sustainable and provide the quality of life that they all want to provide?
Let me connect some dots to the room, and there's a reason why I'm again straw man, because Kirsten, I'll tell you what my big takeaway is from yesterday and today, and I'm just going to put my bias right on the table. I think where we are all headed is to define what a pilot project scope looks like. Very definitive. And how that gets packaged and presented. That's my encouragement, and I'm being very open about my, bias in the call to action. I'm putting this up for a reason, because it's a bridge between, large scale, community-based, which is needed, as Joanne said. You've got to do this where it's not onesies and twosies and this street and that neighborhood. It's got to be looked at from a scale. David has articulated that, there are past examples, current examples of where not just FEMA, but a whole of government have leaned in. What we started looking at and hearing, Joanne and David and others, and lead to Michael Newman stepping up to the platform, so to speak, is we can fix the sticks and bricks. And you're going to hear about this of a state example. But if we're only fixing the sticks and bricks and we're not dealing with food and nutrition, health and well-being, all these other issues, then we really are not resolving the long-term mitigation. What we are doing is, again, we're having people survive from one thing to the next. I know that this is obvious. Here's my challenge, David and Joanne, and others, is if I look at my little symbols, food and nutrition, health and well-being, communications, energy, transportation, those tend to be in very separate pillars. As it was said earlier, it's no question that Feeding America and the food banks are doing phenomenal work, who got very tested by COVID, as you all know. But each of these examples of the 5 pillars there tend to be in their own lanes, even at the local level. And the only time they ever get assembled is when a disaster event occurs. And then it kind of goes away. Then it kind of comes back again. So I think, Kirsten, what we're saying back to you all is the technology, the data, the financial infrastructure is kind of the connector point, or is at least one of the connecting points to addressing some of this. And we're not without prior examples at community levels that have been in place, which now can be, in a sense, polished up, added to, and with, Kirsten, as you said, those folks who are saying, okay, give us something to work off. I think we got it. So,
Right.
Richard, speaking about, connecting dots, and I was writing this up earlier as David was talking about specific solutions, and you were talking about moving away from urgent needs and kind of into the solutions, because we're always focused on urgent needs, right? But I saw, and tying together what I've heard over the last 10, 15 minutes, a large problem is, and don't take offense, but we're all in here in the fancy clothes and softwares and big companies talking about what we think the solutions are at a grand scale. I saw you give the grand scale, the 5 things. And not to put down what everyone's saying and what the boots on ground team are seeing, but I have a consumer grade software company, and I built out for years and years on what I thought people wanted or what they needed. But the moment that I actually started building something great and finding real solutions came from talking to customers and potential customers on a large scale. I put forth all this to say that I don't see enough data analytics, surveys, visualized at these disaster events. Not putting this on anyone in particular, but I'm assuming that may resonate with someone in the room to take action on getting the data that everyone needs to make better decisions and support people affected more before and after disaster strikes. And additionally, I hear about all these plans, but I don't see any of them. I'm thinking that these plans should be made very public to the community, so individuals and businesses, people like Carla at StuX, or maybe even someone who might have a good idea at the mail office or something, can draw some connections, and individuals can put more pressure on their local and state governments as well to
listen, you're not, this is not a sensitive or offensive remark in any way that you've stated. So I'll go ahead and add my offensive remark on top of it. I was asked by the National Academy of Sciences, the National Science, NSF, two different, came into Houston several years ago, and they ran 3 different studies on 3 different low to moderate income community areas of Houston. And to be very, very blunt about it, I'll probably never be asked by the National Academy to come back to the table because I wrote with red marks all over the draft report, but on top of the page was stop asking people in low to moderate income communities what they need. They've told you what they need. They need resources now. They need to not be studied. They need to have implementation. So I want to reinforce what you're saying, and that is people will tell you what they need, and people will tell you how they would like to receive it. And we've got, not we, us, all of us have access to a lot of these reports and studies. That is one of the challenges is, it's out there, they're available. I mean, I'm strengthening your comment, and that is boots on the ground and people in their communities will tell you what they need, how they need it. And often we ask them and then we write reports and we go on. That to me is also the compelling opportunity here is there's some real frustration. Please don't ask us anymore. Just come to us with some help and some solutions.
You know, Rich, two stakeholders in this that we've mentioned, but I'll emphasize again, the employers, the small businesses.
Yes.
As one refinery in Houston told me once, if mama can't come to work, we're just shut down. And look at the schools. If the kids can't be in school because they had 2 inches of water in their house and everything got wet and they couldn't spend the night there for a month, they're not in school. They're not getting breakfast and lunch at school. Yes, they do know what they need, and they need some access right away. Most of these people don't understand, and I say these people, but that come to the NGOs, they need help, but they don't know where to ask and how to ask to access it, I believe. That's, and some of the programs, unfortunately, might preclude them from getting some individual assistance if they're not designed correctly to because there's no duplication of benefits. But anyway, let's don't forget the businesses, the small businesses that employ so many of our citizens and the schools. So in Project Impact, we had all kinds of tech companies here in Austin at the table. They had to talk about what they could do for their and how to do it and how to cooperate.
Right.
So don't forget that group.
Let me use that as a segue, and I want to keep on going. I don't want to cut this off, but I also know that there's kind of a build.
Richard, you've got, is it Melissa in the bottom right corner?
Oh.
You try to raise your hand.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah,
Melissa.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
you. I'll be quick. I'm usually the person who does the redlining and,
Right.
I'm that person, but I will just say organized community. And I threw in the chat a couple of examples that we see in the Hudson Valley of New York, where smart people across silos are figuring stuff out. And I think even small grants to build capacity or small ways of building capacity so that it's not the benefactors reminding themselves to bring the aid forward in welcome ways. It's the communities having more equal power, and that's structural, and you can detect that, you can measure that.
Melissa, I will capture in the notes and provide those links as a part of the follow-up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited by this because what we're seeing is all the very vibrant grassroots and grass tops networks finding the bigger institutions, and it's just kind of hasn't gelled yet.
Right. So let me segue, and just for emphasis, Kirsten, Michael is not a brother of another mother, but we do go to the same barber. But Michael is one of the leaders, mentors to me and our folks, about an important approach, again, that builds upon different forms of investing ahead of the curve that's having phenomenal impacts, but also is working across 24 states. So, Michael, I probably am not going to do the best introduction, but you've got the floor.
All right, thank you so much, Richard, and good morning, everybody. I have to apologize in advance. I have a hard stop at 11, so I'm probably going to present and then miss your conversation afterward. And I apologize about that. I'm going to share my screen because some of what I have to say works best with some visuals.
And you should be able to do it now.
Yeah. All right.
Michael. There we go.
All right. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to dive into Los Angeles because we all know what happened. Propelled by furious winds, the wildfires raced from hillsides to neighborhoods. They destroyed over 16,000 structures and rendered thousands of families homeless. But I want to highlight one individual named Kip Katz, who, according to news reports, lived with his dog and a 70-year-old rambler just below the Altadena golf course. It was probably his proximity to the open spaces of the course that protected his home. Well, I want to ask you, what if luck or happenstance or just happening to live close to a golf course did not dictate whether a home survives or burns to ash? Whether it's wildfire or hurricane or a severe convective storm, we need more families and communities that experience severe weather as a blip and not a fissure. Less damage, less heartache, and less loss. That's why the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety exists, or IBHS. We recreate severe weather, conduct full-scale testing of residential and commercial buildings, identify the vulnerabilities to Mother Nature, and close them with mitigation actions that are effective, affordable, and achievable. We do so ever mindful of the deep need to make homes and communities more survivable and more insurable. Now, this is more important than ever. According to a Realtor.com 2025 Housing and Climate Risk Report, which was just released yesterday, they estimate about 26.1% of U.S. homes with a combined value of $12.7 trillion are exposed to at least one type of severe or extreme weather risk, including hurricanes, wildfires, or floods. So what we do at IBHS is figure out ways to help homeowners, to help business owners, to help communities better withstand that $12.7 trillion at exposed losses. Two of our chief tools are the mitigation programs, Wildfire Prepared and Fortified. I'm going to run through them quickly with you. Wildfire Prepared is a system of mitigation actions that are designed to protect homes in the extremity of wildfires. The system is set out so that Wildfire Prepared Home focuses on protections against ember ignition or homes igniting from embers. A notable part of that is the 5 feet of defensible space around the home. Wildfire Prepared Home Plus provides an additional mitigation actions that protect homes against flames and heat. Now, homeowners can apply to participate in this program. They have to demonstrate that they've taken all the mitigation actions, and it's subject to inspection and verification. That verification component is really, really important to the insurance industry in particular, because it creates a bridge between the action of the homeowner and the property insurance industry so that they know the risk has actually been reduced as intended. In the hurricane, high wind, and hail front, we have our Fortified program. It's available for single family, multifamily, and commercial buildings. Across each of these 3 lanes, Fortified has 3 increasing levels of resilience. Fortified Roof focuses on sealing the roof deck, enhancing roof and nailing patterns, locking down the roof edges. We put so much emphasis on the roof because it can be a major source of protection for a building, but if it fails, it can amplify damages significantly, as significant water can come in from the top, and then you've got mold, you've got remediation, and you go from having maybe a $20,000 loss to having losses in the hundreds of thousands. Fortified Silver focuses on garage doors, windows, and doors, and Fortified Gold adds on to this, adding a continuous load path, basically connectors from the roof all the way down to the foundation that improve the resilience of the home to wind loads. Now, across each of these 3 lanes, a Fortified Hail supplement is also available. I mention hail because it doesn't put people out of their homes, but it causes billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in insurable losses every year. And what that means is that it has a major impact on the rising cost of insurance in hail-prone states. Fortified has been proven to work most recently by a report that came out of Alabama that looked at 40,000 properties in coastal Alabama during Hurricane Sally. It shows that Fortified dramatically reduces the frequency and severity of claims and saves homeowners and insurers millions of dollars per storm. And here's my favorite part of the study. Fortified designated homes performed 50% better than homes built to a Fortified-like building code, but were not designated. See, in Mobile and Baldwin County, Alabama, they have a building code that includes all the requirements of Fortified, but doesn't go through the verification process that's associated with our program. Folks, our verification process has a real performance-enhancing value to the tune of 50%. This is particularly important data as we think about other places like Florida, where the Florida building code is essentially on par with Fortified, but there is an opportunity to improve performance by adding more verification pieces that's associated with our program. So as a result of all of this persistent work, our programs like Fortified and Wildfire Prepared are becoming known as a national standard for resilient construction. Now, this list that you see is not exclusive. We can't even fit our growing list of partners on a single slide anymore, and we see it at the federal, state, and local level. I want to highlight, based on some of the conversation earlier, our engagement with state housing finance agencies who are responsible for creating the rules around low-income housing tax credits. That's a major source of funding for affordable housing. We do a lot of engagement and education in this lane, working with state housing finance agencies around the country. I also want to highlight the work of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in amplifying Fortified and encouraging affordable housing developers to build or retrofit to Fortified Gold. We're seeing progress in Florida and even in a state like Missouri, where public housing authorities are investing in resilience, even if they're not necessarily getting all the way to Fortified. And yet, to meet this moment, we need to expand our thinking beyond public investment and resilience. Now, at IBHS, we're rightfully proud of helping to get over $1 billion in funding towards Fortified housing. And yet, it's really just a drop in a bucket. Here's what I mean. If we gave a $10,000 grant to every resident of Mobile County, Alabama, or every homeowner in Mobile County, Alabama, it would cost $1.6 billion. If we gave a $10,000 grant to every homeowner in Louisiana, it would cost $18.5 billion. Here's another way to think about it. Zesty AI says that 12.6 million properties are at high risk of hail at a replacement value of $190 billion. And recall that Realtor.com report I just mentioned that said there's $12.7 trillion of property that is at risk of extreme weather. So all around the country, we have a deep need for wind retrofits, wildfire retrofits, flood retrofits, hail retrofits to the 150 million housing units around the country. There will simply never be enough public investment to meet this need. So we need to catalyze the innovation and the might of the private sector to meet this moment. This means affordable lending for resilient retrofits with private capital and securitization backing it up. It means sources of capital to help commercial real estate, and in particular, affordable housing, cover the resilience delta, those additional hard costs of building beyond the existing building code. This means building material manufacturers and builders leaning in and providing better goods and services, because resilient homes and products that are survivable and insurable are good for their bottom line. We also need philanthropic investment to target the places where small dollars can have a catalyzing impact. Let me give you a couple of quick examples. On the philanthropy side, there are a number of insurance company foundations that have invested in habitat affiliates, that have invested in other VOADs, voluntary organizations, after disasters, to help them cover the difference between building back or building back too fortified. Wouldn't it be amazing if more foundations and philanthropies pooled resources to help all habitat affiliates build to the relevant IBHS standards? On the private capital side, I want to highlight our work with the federal home loan banks. It all started in Dallas, which began incentivizing Fortified in its affordable housing program a few years ago. If you're not familiar with the federal home loan banks, they are required by law to put at least 10% of profits into affordable housings as grants, which are free if thin capital layers that help support development. Now, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas has been joined by Cincinnati and Atlanta in incentivizing Fortified in their AHPs, affordable housing programs. Dallas has also established a private sector grant program they call the Fortified Fund. This year, they allocated $10 million for single-family homes to put on fortified roofs, and another $10 million for rental properties to put on fortified roofs. This is significant financial commitment that is making a difference. And that's all I have for you. You know, I know there's a lot of fintech folks in the conference room, and I'd encourage you to think about how can your platforms help deliver financing mechanisms to small business owners and to homeowners, because we know there's a great need. There's also, frankly, I think, a gap in the market in offering relatively small loans. Putting on a new roof is $20,000. Putting on a new fortified roof might be $21,000. And that's going to differ on the size of the house. Doing necessary retrofits for wildfire might cost $5,000 to $10,000. That's not a lot of money, but it's more than most people have. As you probably know, the Federal Reserve estimates that 40% of Americans cannot afford an unexpected $400 expense without going into debt. So they can't afford a $5,000, $10,000 investment in the resilience of their home. How do we help deliver capital to meet this need? I think your platforms can probably help. And as I mentioned, I have a hard, like Michael Bodekin, I have a hard stop at 11. So I think I can take like one question and then I will have to go.
Diane, if I could jump in on there, Michael, that's very informative. I want to touch on a couple things. Next year, they're celebrating America 250, the history of America. And there's going to be a lot of community programs, activations, footprints out there promoting the history of America. And I think there's an opportunity as a platform to promote the future of America, which includes all of this disaster relief and all the things you're talking about, and educating the community about, you know, the retrofitting their houses and, you know, what they're up against. Because, you know, maybe I don't live in Florida, but I may have a relative that lives there, and I mentioned yesterday, I have two people that I know were directly impacted, and it could be from a fire, it could be from a flood, or from a hurricane. So I think taking that, maybe next year, there's a tour going on, the America 250 tour, and having a platform there in 50 states where this industry could be delivering the message that I was talking about before with communication, getting to the general public, and having the insurance companies part of it, the community banks, because, you know, if they do need a loan for a retrofit for their house, you know, get the banks behind it. So I just want to throw that out, that there's a platform that's already in place that your message could be delivered. And it's the future of America. It's not just celebrating the history. So
Diane, let me, I know Michael had a hard stop, and I appreciate him jumping in. I know we're running a little bit behind, but I want to play off of, again, something that Michael raised. and play off of what you just said. Again, when we talk about the capital stack, I think Michael just gave another example. So when we had the Federal Home Loan Bank Board down here, when we did our first roundtable at the Federal Reserve Bank, they began to introduce this idea. Part of this is very dedicated to affordable housing. So this isn't just people who can afford, a 20,000 or 5,000. This is really a set of programs, and if you take a look at what Strengthening Alabama Homes has done, which is the exemplar, but this is underway in a lot of different states. Again, Kirsten, what I think you heard Michael reinforce is the bridge between funders and beneficiaries, and where PaaL plays that critical role, and then how we also introduce some of the programs that are already in place or emerging that have the need to support more affordable areas, meaning low to moderate income communities. So Diane, to your point, I believe that part of the activation that you're describing becomes a part of whatever a pilot scope or project scope that we come out with today. Any other quick thoughts about what you heard from Michael?
Let's don't forget the National Association of Mayors. Richard, you and I had mentioned that group.
Yes.
They're close to their communities, and I don't want to volunteer David for any projects because he's a busy man. We can come back to the group with some products that might be able to fill some of these needs from the private sector. I'm thinking particularly the reinsurance community, designing some of them, and just for some examples of what could happen for some fund be tailored a number of ways. Remember that insurance is built on the law of large numbers. The more participants, the better spread of risk. And that would be true if you were getting community programs, let's say in a parametric program. The more communities that joined would pool those losses. But if you want David and me to do some homework, we can at least start talking about it and bring something back to the group.
Yeah, I think that is a part of a great takeaway that I'm beginning to, see emerge that Kirsten and this group have already been working on, and I think, in a collaboration around some of these activities. So Kirsten, thank you, Joanne, for that offer. Let me play one other thing. I use this as an example. So Mobile has 3 major employers that support the national defense of this country, very similar to Charleston, South Carolina, and a number of other places. So, hurricane hits, they have to shut down the plants, obviously, but when they discovered that something like 40% of their employees were not able, and Joanne raised this, not able to come back. But what they did not know, and not an accusation at all, but they really did not know the connection of actually discovering with their HR how many of their employees were somewhat borderline at low to moderate income thresholds. When they discovered that, they suddenly realized that these 3 major employers, working with the chambers, working with others, actually had a stake in not just getting their plant operations back up and going, but getting their employees back up and going. So there is this shift that's begun to occur around the country where major employers in some of the most vulnerable areas also are better aware now with data and need even more data to help them connect with their own employees. And you heard Kirsten talk about that yesterday. One of the things that has occurred around the Strengthen Alabama Homes program is to actually sit with the major employers to say, where are your employees most vulnerable and how can we find ways to get them these types of grants, knowing full well that they may not be able to afford them. There's been a lot of connection point there. Let me move very quickly because I know we're coming up on our time here. This is a lead in, Krista, to you. But one of the things that we started looking at, David, way back with the community disaster resilient zones and based on the significant work, for instance, of Project Impact, but kind of going forward, and it leverages something that Michael just said as well. If we're going to retrofit home small businesses, that means that we actually need small businesses in these communities to become part of the economic engine that delivers these retrofits. So one of the things that we started looking at across the country is, how do you engage more individuals in low to moderate income communities who are persistently impacted with employment, job training skills to actually make their own communities more resilient? Not a one-off job opportunity, but an ongoing engagement in the long-term resilience. So one of the things that I'm kind of putting out there, again, Krista, as a little bit of a straw man is, or straw woman, is we need these community navigators that are persistently in place and hired. And we find them often working for a Red Cross or United Way. VOADs remain critical, but we're not funding VOADs on a consistent, persistent basis. But then we started taking a look at where there are opportunities for apprenticeships and internships with developers, home builders, small businesses that actually are going to do the long-term adaptation and fortification in their communities, in their regions. And last but not least, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, Kirsten, is the supply chains. And oh God, what's our young fellow with the SDU? The Kirsten, I'm going to miss.
Cedric, Georgia State?
Yes, the one that's doing the blockchain for suppliers and all. All right.
QX.
Yeah.
We're currently work with Mondelez, is using us for supply chain management.
Yep.
And
So
locking the transactions.
one of the things that we realized coming out of COVID was we didn't know where the PPE was. So a lot of folks started creating it using 3D printing in their own communities. Well, that opened up a whole interest, and then it's kind of waned again. But there was an interest of actually finding ways to manufacture certain solutions in our own backyards, which become, again, a part of the supply chain. But what it also does is it provides donors an opportunity to put their money to work in these types of opportunities, what we call people-centric outcomes. So I want to put that, again, as a straw man. Krista, let me introduce you and jump into all of the different work that you've done and you've seen across the country.
Hey, Richard, thank you so much. I've been listening a lot to the conversation today. So if any of you have seen the chat, I'm probably the one putting a ton in there. This is certainly a passion of mine, and I kind of want to lead with thinking about disaster recovery and why people stay, why they leave. It's a lot to do with social capital. Research has shown social capital is the #1 factor for people staying after an event. And why we want people to stay in their communities after an event is simple numbers, right? We keep people in our communities, we keep our tax base high, we keep our issues of slight and blight homes going down, right? We keep values of homes up. And we need to understand that connection to our small businesses too, because so many within our communities are small business owners. When I lived in Texas, I was there for 20 years. My husband and I ran our small business out of our house while I worked for the state full time, right? Our citizens are not just our small business owners that have storefronts. They are people working out of their homes day in and day out. And those homes are part of all of that. And all of that is part of that social capital, because when you feel connected to your community, you're more apt to invest in it, right? And so keeping those connections and that social capital is so important. And as we've heard, a lot of our citizens don't have the emergency reserves available to them. And that means also our small business owners may not have those emergency reserves available. So it's got to be a partnership between multiple entities across the spectrum. And as we've been talking about, how do we infuse, and, you know, to your point early on, Kristen, I think you were the one that brought up evangelizing what fintech can bring to the emergency management community. We need to meet the emergency managers where they are. Because I will tell you, most people, when they think about who emergency managers are, they think about Joanne and David, who were at FEMA. They don't think about the guy who is the fire chief at the volunteer fire department. He is a local lawyer. And oh, by the way, he wears the hat of the emergency manager, because that's who your emergency managers are. And where they convene is at groups like IAEM, which is the International Association of Emergency Managers. State directors go to NEMA, which is the National Emergency Management Association. Those two associations talk all the time. If you watch them, they're putting out multiple papers, position papers that support each other. So they're fairly in line with each other, but that's where your audience is. So I think fintech needs to get there and talk their language, or have someone who can translate kind of the fintech language. I now work in an industry where we're high tech, and we're also very much about environmental hazard response. And I work with a lot of private sector clients. So I'm the person now doing temporary housing for our oil and gas clients when disasters hit those areas so their employees can get back, right? So it's a shift from what I've done at the state level, but I've had to learn how to translate what emergency management is into those spaces. So having someone who can translate to emergency managers what it is y'all bring to the table, and to help them ease their guard. Because I will tell you, the one thing emergency managers are most fear of is talking to private sector people. Why? Because we've had beat into our heads that we have to follow the Code of Federal Regulations on procurement. And if you talk to those private sector people, you're going to get your hand slapped by OIG under an audit or an investigation, right? And so there's a lot of fear around talking to the private sector, and there's a shift in emergency management that's happening that way. But I wanted to bring that awareness to you, that it's not for a lack of desire for advancing what we can do to prepare people for disasters. It's talking to the people who, like I said, in Texas, every designated emergency manager is the county judge, and then they can assign someone else. When I talk to the county judge for Jasper County, Texas, who gets hit with hurricanes all the time and flooding events, he came off of his tractor with his overalls on. This is the county judge, right? He was tending to his farm because that's his full-time job. Then he's the county judge, and then he's the emergency manager on top of it, right? So talking to those folks and having language that speaks to them is important. And those are also your small business owners, because the county judge is probably running a business out of their house too, as a, you know, maybe they're the attorney for in town too. So small businesses, our homes, our resilience, it's all interconnected. And these are the people, these are the lives we're talking about. We're not, there's very few in the big broad spectrum of people who work in emergency management. There's very few who are at FEMA. There's very few who are at the state level. Your local emergency managers, your emergency managers for your Walmarts, for your private corporations as well. That's a whole different industry of people. So businesses have their own emergency managers, and those are important people to talk to. So Richard got off on a little tangent, but I think it's important to put that into perspective based on everything I've heard in the conversation today.
Krista, on that, one of the reasons, exactly what you said, is a reason that PaaL's a 501c3.
Yeah.
So we, the educator, the translator, you don't get your hand slapped talking to a 501c3, even if it's fintechs. that are supporting it. And that's been a good way to open doors.
Absolutely. And I think that's a
Krista-
great point. Yeah, for sure, because that does ease some concerns. For sure.
Hey, Krista, this is a conversation with inside the family for the moment, even though it's being recorded. So I will serve as your legal advisor on what I'm about ready to ask you. Okay. Hurricane Harvey presented very interesting challenges between a federal agency, a state agency, a county agency, and a state agency, all of which you are fully aware. I don't want to walk you into that quagmire, but what I do want to
I can talk about it, I don't care.
But what I do
I'm
want
from
to talk,
Jersey. There's no filter here anymore, y'all.
reason why I love you. All right. But what I do want to talk about is that if you could look back and say, here is a structure leveraging this PaaL consortium example of the technology, the way to get funds in people's hands quicker, auditable, without the fraud, but also very targeted on how they can use their funds. If you were to say, C-Line, I'm queen for a day, which you always are, here's how we would have done this, what would it look like?
So first I would have started with our Texas Rebuild Fund, because that raised an exorbitant amount of money. And I think that using those philanthropic funds that have come in, those private donor funds that have come in, and to streamline, one, to identify where the true need is, to then streamline. So I'll give you an example. I knew from my days in emergency management, when I went over to the HUD funded program, there are gaps when it comes to rebuilding homes. So Mrs. Smith gets placed into a temporary house. Meanwhile, her utility bill is still stacking up on her damaged house. And she's 6-7 months, maybe a year or two later, finally into her permanent house. And what does she have? She has $5,000 in back due utility bills, right? I knew those gaps because I've worked across the spectrum. And so what I did was I applied for a grant at the Texas Rebuild Fund. But I couldn't hold it because I was a state person. So I had Salvation Army be my financier. And so every time I came up with that one-off scenario of this person needs a hot water heater, or this person needs some utility bills paid, and there's no other funding stream to fill that blank, then I was the person who worked through that case and managed it. And I did it for thousands of households across Texas because that level of detail is needed to understand that. Technology certainly could have helped me, but I just spent 17 hours a day working for 3 years, right? Like I made sure that I watched for those gaps when my case managers would come in and say this was something that was going on. But to me, if the first step you could ask me to fix, it would be something like that. Where are the gaps gonna be? How do we identify those? Where are at-risk populations? And how do we make sure that the funding streams are getting to the right people? Another example is in the most recent floods in Texas, local emergency manager had me present disaster recovery stuff to them 2 weeks before the disaster hit. He called me a couple of weeks ago and said, I've got all this money coming in and we have people that need to be in, temporary housing. So I think I'm just going to throw money at them while we get our long-term recovery group stood up. I was like, no, you have individual assistance. Individual assistance is that stopgap. They're going to give rental assistance. Don't waste your philanthropic dollars on rental assistance when there's another program that's funding it. When you can use that money for long-term recovery, when you need it for building materials, when you need it to help those people get back on their feet. So also where tech can help is understanding all those funding streams, because that's where people get lost, right? If you don't have someone who has worked at all those different layers and knows how to plug in here and there and can anticipate what might be coming down, that's where people get stuck. I could talk about this all day, y'all, so be prepared. I do need to stop at some point, but yeah, this is my jam.
Hey, Kirsten, just so you know, Krista is one of the original national members of the Get Shit Done civic movement because she did this, as all of y'all do, in certain ways. Yes, sir.
No, I just wanted to comment on this. We deal with this and similar issues on a day-to-day basis. This is, we wish could have saved you quite a few of those 3 years to be more efficient, at least not 17 hours. It would have the headaches.
But look,
Yeah.
It's there.
let me play off and bridge something that Krista's also talking about, that you all have been talking about, that came up, Krista, yesterday. All right. It was said earlier, technology can be more efficient, effective, economical, and it can reduce the time between funders and beneficiaries.
Yeah.
Let's make the assumption, check mark, that's what we've got. What we also seem to have is a number of, I mean, I've got 5 of them on my phone as an example of folks that have come to us and said, I've got a way to connect supplies with demand. Well, they come and go. Some of them still exist. There's Nextdoor, there's all these things.
Right.
I think, Krista, what you're saying is there's a bunch of you around the country, and we now have this phenomenal source of infrastructure on the technology and fintech side. It's how do we actually connect the Krista Lopez's to the tools and resources sitting around the table in DC? Person, isn't that what we're really, one of the issues is? We've got it, we're ready to go. How do we connect this to the Kristas that are literally having to do this 17 hours a day because they're passionate? How do we connect the dots to them? But Krista.
So Richard, we're talking about actionable pilots, and we want to do that blue sky to the degree there's ever any blue sky. And Krista, you were saying some of the challenge is what you and your team had done with, okay, there's all these sources of money, Zach needs money, all these sources of money. So you would know what fintech can do is to have those sources in buckets. So this is supposed to be for housing and this is for food. We can have these buckets and do all the accounting and the reporting and the data. But I'd love to figure out who to pilot with on what you just said. Go to one community, one group of responders and show how it works. And then it came up earlier, show it and then blast it out to the other communities.
Yeah, so I currently, my paid job, I'm working with the state of New Mexico, and they've been seeing wildfire and flooding event, and they're in the middle of monsoon season, and they are seeing significant flooding because now they have burn scar and everything is washed away. And so now they're losing infrastructure and homes, and there's also massive impact into the Mescalero Apache tribe, as well as some other tribes. So I think about some of those smaller states that are doing a great job at what they're doing, but can always use some ideal resources to pilot and to strengthen what they already have in hand. So that comes to mind. I would also recommend engaging with my buddy, Tom Sivak. Tom was the Region 5 administrator for FEMA until recently, and he now works for an AI group that's focused in emergency management called EM1. And I think Tom's knowledge as well, and a couple of us to sit and to kind of brainstorm the use of technology and disasters and how we can tie it in so strategically. The other way I think about using this, honestly, as a pilot is, so I currently live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we see disasters on an annual basis as well. I'm 8 miles from the ocean, and we have a large community that is in the low to moderate income population. There are already homes that if a heavy rainfall comes in, their roofs are flooding, right? They've got rotting windows, whatever have you. So why not pick populations that already have homes that may be at risk due to their current structure, and use these tools to pilot helping them prepare and make their homes more resilient for disasters and show that we can actually raise up our at-risk communities before an event, because that's what we keep talking about is we got to get this done before an event. It's in emergency management, we say you never exchange business cards at the disaster. You always want to exchange them ahead of time. The idea of getting this out ahead of a disaster, work in a community that might be high risk for an event, flooding, fire, whatever have you, but focus on mitigating those homes that might be at risk, and getting them out in front before that next event hits. That's my thought. And there's plenty of communities across the country, whether it's tribal lands, whether it's a city like Wilmington, whether it's a small community in California, like that of the Eaton Fire, where it was a historically Black community that had rich history and amazing culture and amazing social capital. But when a fire strikes that community, they are absolutely decimated because it's so astronomical to rebuild in that space, right? So pick communities like that that might be those high risk, and use this as a function in a mitigation realm, to prevent, because then you'll get buy-in when the disaster hits, because everybody's going to be coming knocking at your door.
Zach?
Yeah, Krista, I think that's great. And next time you see Tom, tell him Zach said hello from Vanguard Cohort 6.
Great.
Tom's a great guy. Yeah. You know, I think you're right. I think a couple of things. It seems like we're talking a little bit about pre-disaster, immediate response, and long-term recovery. Long-term recovery is a completely different animal, and you know that very well.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, it is messy. Beyond messy, right? You have different structures and systems and, you know, access to different pots of money, depending on how the long-term recovery group's set up, you know, whether it's foundations that hold the money or whatever. Too often, unfortunately, I think in the emergency management world, emergency managers, at least in my experience, not all of them, but a lot of emergency managers don't necessarily understand long-term recovery because that's not their jam. That's not where they engage, right? And so their plates are already full. Like you said, they're wearing 3 different hats, you know, they're the local pastor, they're the fire chief, and they've got like emergency management, just like, you know, we'll just tack that on, right?
Right.
So I think this idea of you know, preparedness and mitigation for piloting something with this group is really where it's at. And I think there's multiple different directions we can go, and I feel like the resources are around this table. And I think it's literally just a matter of pulling together, you know, a model and going with it, right? And I think there's going to be buy-in, you know, at the local level, you know, local emergency management, and I'm excited about it and would love to be involved. And I've got a couple of ideas that I've been jotting down as we've been talking.
Krista, Richard, hold on. Krista, we're based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, right near the Capitol.
Oh, fantastic. I spend a lot of time there these days.
So
Richard.
Yeah. So here's in our kind of closing minutes, because you know, very transparently, Kirsten sent me a text a little bit ago saying, Richard, we can't boil the ocean. I wanted to boil the ocean at the very beginning. So let's get this down to specifics. There's a lot of notes that I've taken. We've got the recording from today. There's work from yesterday. I kind of put just 3 forms or ways to look at introducing, quote unquote, a pilot project. But I would propose, Kirsten, that we get down to a project scope or scopes of what a pilot project would look like. I'm a big fan of having PaaL in its own right certify, so to speak, the delivery and local integration of some form of a package toolkit that addresses state, local, corporate philanthropy, especially on the corporate side. That's my bias. Second, while these RSAs continue and Kevin does his work, I do believe, using the phrase pre-positioning, we have an opportunity to maybe use some existing tools that in structures that already are in place for access to capital as a means of introducing RSAs, but not waiting for them to get through the legislative process. And there are the various forms of these access to capital pieces that we've talked about. Then the third is, I'm not a big fan of waiting for RFPs to hit the market. I'm a big fan of trying to find out who really has a need, is a champion, is looking for a solution. Some are ready to go, some are ready but not sure where to go. So I am a big fan, Krista, of the idea of a reverse kind of competition to say, look, we're prepared to come in and work with you by bringing these different tools and resources. But I would say, Kirsten, the next step, and I think this is actually can be done within a week, is what would be the scope or scopes of a perfect type of pilot project, and then use the folks that are on the phone and folks in the room and others to really vet where the opportunities are to introduce and see where there are 3 to 4 pilot projects that could be moved and introduced and launched then in 2026.
Richard, can I interject real quick on just your concept of not waiting for an RFP? One thing I might suggest is to consider that many of the current, what we call the current class of CDBG-DR recipients, which is the Community Development for Block Grant Disaster Recovery from HUD, a lot of them in their action plans put planning studies as an opportunity. And so those states who receive those funds are going to put out RFPs to do a planning study around something. If you get a group together to go meet with those states ahead of time and say, we'd like to propose to do a planning study around this topic for your state or for a particular community in your state that's at high risk, then you can sometimes help shape an RFP that comes out, right? And you can propose piloting this in that planning study. And it can be funded through those HUD funds. So that's just one
No,
suggestion.
that's great, because again, there are sources of both funding and opportunities for pilots. And I think Joanne said it earlier about the mayors. I think what we're all not struggling with, but what we now need to do is create a framework of what it is. It right now, Kirsten, is the highly phenomenal brain power of PaaL on the technical operational integration piece. I think we need to get this in some form of an example package or toolkit of what it is, and then begin to say, look, here's at least a framework. How does this align with your immediate and emerging needs and who those folks are? And we've talked a lot over the past 2 days. We've got some places where we think there's an opportunity to do some pilots, others on the phone and in the room. I just think now what we do in the next very quick follow-up to yesterday and today is what it is or its are, and where we want to target to see if we can move some pilots in the next, 4 to 5 months.
Well, Richard, definitely there's a lot of building on the foundation of what's existing will save a lot of time, first off. And I think that definitely helps push the needle a little faster. And harkening back to what Joanne said about Project Impact, is that as an example, there are communities that were involved in Project Impact in the late 90s, early 2000s that are still doing things. And, one of the ideas around Project Impact that made it so successful across all political scales, so much participation, so much interest, is that it brought together stakeholders. public, private, nonprofit, academics, technical experts, the media, everybody was on the same page. Now, pilots got, the first 7 pilots, which we benefited from, got $1 million. So it was seed money, which would the idea was you take the seed money to leverage it into more. And we had millions of dollars in participation over multiple years. And the communities that came after that, they got 500,000, and the next were 250, and it went down from there. But I will tell you, having worked with hundreds of these communities, is some of them didn't want any money. They just wanted to build on the momentum. They wanted to bring the partnership together, because so much was accomplished by putting a community's brain trust together. And it wasn't just the community, it was also expanding regionally. It was looking at, national, federal partners. There's a lot of interest in this. Not even talking about the money, there's a lot of interest in this. And obviously this is pre-disaster we're talking about. But I will also tell you that after many disasters, many of those communities faced disasters, and that carried over into the response and the recovery, especially in the long term. So these relationships, this capacity building, the community building, it has a staying power, and it does make a difference. I think we are talking about two kind of categories. Is the pre-disaster, because it's a different approach around mitigation and all that, because we know there's things that can be done. We also know we can't stop some of these disasters right now, and we have to address them, but they can both be a momentum built to address both at the same time. I think so much attention sometimes goes to response that we end up missing, and we've talked about this, different people have mentioned this, we end up missing the pre-disaster. We can actually reduce the risk or eliminate it altogether. With the nonprofit in particular, we talked about small businesses. I just wanted to throw out there's been great comments about that. We put together a brain trust of business continuity, emergency managers, and so forth, to look at the solutions and why don't businesses plan. And the statistics are at least 60% of small businesses don't have a disaster plan or business continuity. And I think that's a low number. And so we pulled together, looked at best practices to come up with strategies, and we came up with a disaster resistant business toolkit, or a DRB toolkit, that took all the stuff out there that large companies use for planning and training and education. Because what we really saw was that every single disaster, small businesses are hit hard, every single one. And they haven't done anything, so they're really at a loss in many respects. And that has a direct impact economically on communities and slows the recovery. So our focus has been on addressing the education, but we're a small nonprofit. So we've got tools, software, other things that we've developed, and we've got something new that we're coming out with. And these are all things where partnerships can make a huge difference on how do we move the needle on education, because if people don't understand why they need to do this, they're not going to do it. And that's the baseline of all mitigation, is people need to understand the risk combined with the solutions that will help them move forward. And then we can actually get people taking action to reduce their risk, which then leads into the disaster side, where we don't have as many people at risk, and then you can tackle those that are at the highest risk that haven't done anything. But it's a combined effort. But back to your point, Richard, is building on what currently exists, I think, will save a lot of time. The communities that have been out there that have accomplished a lot, Krista's point, there's a lot that we can build on. I think that this is very exciting to be having this conversation and see how we can work together on it.
So Kirsten, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you with this kind of call to action for your wrap up. Is we, Future Proofing America, are dedicated to the work of what PaaL is about, and how we believe PaaL is a phenomenal piece of the infrastructure for pre-disaster risk mitigation. There's no question. What I would ask is between now and Wednesday of next week, somehow we curate all the different notes and pieces, but that there is an opportunity for maybe a handful of us to do some very quick work on what a scope of a pilot project looks like, or project scenarios look like, and then get it back out to the larger group. At the same time, I mean, I've got notes about, there are some kind of knowledge gaps that need to be addressed, but those knowledge gaps shouldn't hold us back, meaning like the CDBG grants and other grants that will, I think, fund some of this work to be done to introduce a PaaL certified type of package or toolkit. But we're ready to go, Kirsten, and we're ready to go with a couple of pilot areas. And we need the communications engagement that my friend who wears that beautiful beret that I need to have and others can do. I think we've got 3 or 4 subgroups that I see in this table and others that we've brought together. I think we could really bang something out pretty damn quick by the end of September.
So Richard, the beauty is there are several here at this table that are already in motion in Los Angeles, in Texas, around these disasters, not only on the rapid response, but on the resilient response that will be there for the next 5 to 7 years or 10 years. Right. So we're already, we're not starting at zero. We're already moving.
Yeah. No, please know that this is not like no one's ever thought about it. I think what the issue is how to begin to at least package up a couple of these things where it's not just that we have something to present, that we have something very specific to that you all feel comfortable, even though you may be competitors, collaborators, or whatever. I just firmly believe that the more that we can take the brain power, some examples that already are moving and have moved, and make sure that we've got a package or set of packages to offer out.
So Richard, I know you take copious notes. I'm watching copious notes around the table. I'll reach out, we'll sync back up. Thoughts that folks may have, please share. One of the things we talked about translation. So there's a whole bunch of studies and surveys and stats that you all referenced. Can you send the URLs maybe to Richard? And I'll add them. We have a link tree, PaaL does, associated with this event. And we'll load them in there so that, you know, we'll show you our studies, you show us yours. So we're not starting from ground zero. We're translating and then building on the top of that.
This does not need to be, and I'm looking at this group that's assembled around the table who I've gotten to know remotely, but I can feel the passion that was discussed earlier. And I can feel, frankly, it's okay that you can do well and do great at the same time, which this younger generation has taught me. And that is, I thought we had to do, well first before we could, the fact is that this group can make money, grow their businesses, and have the impact for the society and communities that we're talking about. I just believe that right now, the next critical step is, what is it? What is a PaaL? I keep on saying this, a PaaL certified, so to speak, package, number one. Number two, you've got 3 or 4 people around the table, also on the phone in our network, that are phenomenal at communications and engagement. That's a part of this, right? Diane, I wrote you a note. I want to introduce you to our team called grounded.org, which is based in New York and LA. You may already know them, but I believe that there are about 3 subgroups that if you all are okay with it, Kirsten, you and I could literally move this ball by the end of September of having what the packages look like, what needs to be leveraged on the communications and engagement, and most importantly, where there are maybe some potential 3 to 5 pilot areas to move quickly with.
Yep. So I know everybody's fatigued. We've been sitting here for a few hours. Does anybody have something to add that hasn't been teed up? Rich, I know you're recording this. If you could share the slides that were shared in the transcript, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
and we have some folks in the room that weren't on the invites. We can get that out.
Very much so. thank y'all for allowing us to intrude on your busy schedules, and hopefully this sparks some additional thinking and maybe even some new ways to leverage the post-event now on the pre-event side of the equation. We look forward to continuing our work together in our affiliation. With that, we stand adjourned. Yes, sir. Thank you all. Thank you all for your work. Talk soon.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you.